Hey everybody, welcome. In this video, I'm going to take this beautiful piece of structured English over here and I'm going to turn it into a Python program. So before we do anything with Python, let's take a look at what we have over here on the right. So structured English looks a lot like pseudocode, but it leans more towards the English side. And really, structured English is pseudocode, but it's just a very verbose pseudocode. So it uses almost just sentences to tell you what it's doing. So what we have here is we have a loop, and this loop is going to ask for an ID, and we're going to assume that ID is a number. And it's going to ask for that ID, and each time it does, it's going to check if the ID is correct, and if it is correct, then the user will get access to the system. If it's not correct, then the user will have two things happen. One, it will ask them to enter the ID again, but if they've already entered it incorrectly for 5 times, it's going to freeze the system for 10 seconds. So kind of like if you logged into your bank and you kept trying to log into your bank account, eventually it's going to lock you out. Usually after 3 tries, it'll lock you out and freeze it, maybe until you call them, or maybe for 10 or 20 minutes. I did it for 10 seconds just because I don't really think you want to watch a 20-minute video of me sitting around waiting for the loop to unfreeze. So out of this structured English here, we're going to need some things that aren't actually listed here. The first thing is we're going to need to create some variables. And the variable that we're going to need to create is first an ID number. So I'm going to say ID number is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the second thing we're going to need is a way to check how many times that I've entered an ID number. So I'm going to say ID tries, and I'm going to start at 0. Okay, so that works pretty good. Now your first inclination after that might be to try to copy this exactly and make a while loop just like this. So saying while ID number does not equal my ID try. So I'm going to have an input statement here. I'll say ID check is equal to input. And at this point, I'm going to move this over like that. Input, and I'm going to say enter ID. And you're going to realize that this is going to lead to some issues. So I'm going to say ID check. Oops. And you're going to say, all right, well, if I enter the correct ID, then these will be equal here, and I'll end up outside of the loop, which means that you won't actually be running this stuff in here that allows the user access. You'll also, if you enter it incorrectly, so let's say that I put in the incorrect ID and ID check is maybe 10 and it's actually 12,345. That means I'm going to have to, once again, I'm going to have this inside here to ask for it after I do all the if statements, which really, I'm making more work for myself than I need to because I'm doubling up on this input statement. And I'm going to have to put something here for the user access, and I'll have to put something down here for the user access, just in case they put the ID in correctly the very first time. So to make this a little easier, I'm going to change my loop to be true. And I'm going to take the input statement, and I'm going to put it right down here. Okay, so what this does is it's going to allow us to maintain the idea of the loop in the structured English, but not necessarily do it exactly like it's written here. And that's a really important thing when you're dealing with structured English, is you don't try to copy it exactly into code. You just want what it does, the implementation, to give the same result, but not necessarily in exactly the same way that it's going over here. So as long as it goes through the loop, asks for an ID, checks the ID, and does these 3 things, your loop can look like however you want over here. It doesn't matter. But it does need to implement the actual program in the same way. Okay, because every programming language is different. So if you write this in Python, or you write this in Java, or C++, or Haskell, or any other language, this idea will come out looking a lot different. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Structured English, when you see it, don't copy it straight over, because sometimes it'll make your life harder. Alright, so let's go in here and check this out. So the ID, the first thing I want to do actually is, I can do this two ways. I think I'm going to make this a string, so that when I enter it, the input will make ID check also a string, and then I can compare them without having to convert to integers or doing anything crazy like that. Okay, that also leaves it an option for me to, use alphanumeric ID numbers. Okay, so anyways, enough of that, let's move on. So if the ID check is equal to ID number, then I want to print allowing access, ... Okay, so that's really all we're doing. And then we want to break out of the loop. So once I break out of the loop, I'm done. Okay, so let's go ahead and test to make sure this works. Enter ID, nope, and notice there's no warning that I've done something wrong yet. Now let's go ahead and enter the correct ID, and it says allowing access, and we close. Good. Alright, back to the code. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this middle part, and I'm going to put my else on next. And the else is going to say print incorrect ID. Try again. Okay, so we'll leave it without the exclamation point there. We'll just be a little more civil. Alright, so now if I run this, and I do this, it'll tell me incorrect ID and try again and try again. Okay. Alright, the other thing I want to do in here is, if I have done it incorrectly, I want to increase ID tries by 1. Alright, so I'm going to increase my ID tries, and the next thing I'm going to do is put my else if in. And here I'm going to need to say if ID tries is, well, greater than or equal to 5. I don't know how it could be greater than 5 based on what we're about to do, but you never know. So if ID tries is greater than or equal to 5, then we're going to do a couple things. The first thing we want to do is we're going to print out that you have tried too many times. So print you have failed 5 times. Then I'm going to make another print statement, system freezing. Does something simple like that. Alright, so how do you freeze the system? Well, this is where we have to bring in time. We're going to import the time module, and I'm going to say time.sleep 10. And I'm hoping this is for 10 seconds and not 10 milliseconds. I guess we'll find out here in just a second. Okay, so let's go ahead and freeze the system. And when we come out of the freeze, we need to make ID tries equal back to 0. So now we can get 5 more tries when we're done. Alright, so let's give it a go. Enter ID, nope. Enter ID, nope. 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 You have failed 5 times system freezing. Okay. Now in actuality I tried 6 times. So it seems there is a slight error with my program. So let's see what I did wrong. It looks like because I start at 0 instead of 1, that this first one counts as the 0 try. So I'm going to go ahead and up this to, actually we can just do this. If ID, well, let's put it like ID try 1. We'll call this ID try 1. Then we'll run it. Okay, so ID 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, and you have failed 5 times, and it freezes for 10 seconds, and then Alright, now we put the correct ID in and it allows access. Okay, so structured English to Python code. So here's your Python code with a little new something, the sleep method, which will freeze for however many seconds you want. And then over here you have this nice little bit of structured English, which we turned into this beautiful Python code. So if you have any questions on this, anything at all, please leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next video.